sections. What is technical debt? So, what are the types of technical debt? What is the definition of technical debt? And then I will be looking into why technical debt. So, why should we take technical debt? What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? What are the types of technical debt that we can take? After that, I will be covering when to repay debt. So, once we take debt, we have to repay it. So, I will be covering the framework to manage debt and to repay debt. So, in between I will also be covering a few Joomla groups and giving a context of how technical debt exists in Joomla CMS and how you can volunteer to reduce the technical debt in Joomla. Audience poll. So, please raise your hands if you have never taken debt in your life. Anybody here who has never taken debt in your life? Have you ever taken debt in your life? Financial debt. So, I guess all of us have taken financial debt in our life. So, in that case most of you are already aware of technical debt. So, technical debt is a term which is analogous to financial debt in the financial world. So, we will look into how technical debt affects quality of the software product. So, I was doing research of the amount of technical debt in CMS. So, there is a way to quantify technical debt in any software. So, I was looking into the issue tracker of Joomla, and there are around 1000 issues logged under the issue tracker. So, if you take an average of $100 it takes to fix one defect, so there is almost 100K technical debt exists in Joomla project. So, I was also looking into the issue tracker of the other CMS also, like WordPress and Drupal. So, there also they have around 4,000 issues, and Drupal also has 7,000 issues in their issue tracker. So, this is only indicative figure. So, I will explain how to measure debt in the coming slides. So, technical debt is a compromise between quality and profit. So, I came across this Twitter conversation online. So, here one of the guy has tweeted, code quality is closely related to the number of times I will fix this later was muttered during development. So, this is what technical debt is about. Developers always say I will fix it later. So, we have a model to deliver, and we finish it 80% and 20% we will say that we will fix it later. So, to this another person has replied, while profit may be inversely related. So, when you withhold work, withholding work is taking technical debt. So, once you withhold work, you reduce the development time. So, it decreases the code quality. So, one guy has said the higher the quality you aim for, higher is the cost, and it will affect the profit. So, this is true only if, for short term. You can increase the profit by taking technical debt in the short term. So, if you look at the last tweet, immediate profit perhaps long term profit doubtful. So, if you take debt for a long time like credit card debt and you never repay the debt, the interest keeps accruing and you end up paying more. So, during 1990s Cunningham coined this term technical debt. So, it is a financial metaphor, it is a financial analogy for financial debt that we take in real life. So, during that time Cunningham was observing how startups are developing softwares, like how extension developers in Joomla develop software. So, these startup companies are short on cash. So, what they will do is, suppose they have to develop 3 features, they will not have enough cash to develop these features completely, release it to the end user, take the feedback and improvise it. So, they will take shortcuts in development, they might just mock up the features to get a feedback of the customer. So, this is in total contrast to big corporations which develop software following all the cycles, all the coding standards and all those things. So, financial metaphor, it is defined as long term consequences of taking shortcut which may affect the quality of the software product. So, the different qualities of software product may be reliability, performance, efficiency, portability, usability, maintainability, security. So, these things we do not look in the short term. When we are developing a software, we are in agile mode, we just want to release it. So, during those times we do not look into these things. These things will be affected in the long term. So, what are the terminologies in technical debt? These are the main two terminologies under technical debt. One is the principal and another is the interest. So, when a developer says I will fix it later, he is essentially withholding X hours of work. If you convert this X hours of work into Y dollars, this is the principal amount. So, the developer has saved Y dollars amount of money during that period by withholding the work. The assumption is he will repay that amount in the next day or the next week after the release. Usually technical debt is taken during a release, so that we can make an early release, get a customer feedback and repay the debt after the release is made. In that case, what is interest? So, the developer said I will fix it later, assuming that he will fix it within a day or week. Suppose he never fixes it and starts implementing new features without fixing the bad code. So, in that case he is putting extra effort to add new features, because he has to take care of the bad code he has written. So, this picture depicts the situation. Every minute spent on not quite right code counts as interest on the debt. So, we have to make early release. We developed a poor quality software, we released it, and until you replace the square shaped wheels with round shaped wheels, you are struggling to add new features. So, now we can say the technical debt is the principal plus interest. So, as we heard yesterday, we are irrational and we never take time to repay the debt. So, technical debt is a very easy term. We think that we have understood it. Once we get into a situation, it is difficult to make a decision. It is difficult to apply technical debt properly. So, suppose you have taken technical debt of 1 day's work and the release date has come. So, what should be done? So, some people get confused and they think that they should repay the technical debt before the release, make the release and then make the release. This will totally nullify the benefit of technical debt. The technical debt is the fastest way to customer feedback. So, you take once you have the technical debt, don't fix it before, don't repay it before the release. First make the release, take the customer feedback and then repay the debt. So, the benefit is you took the debt, you gained some time, you release the software, you got the customer feedback, and then all the minor issues you just close it off. So, what are the types of debt? So, every phase of development we can take technical debt, whether it is design, whether it is coding or it is testing. The other phases like build and deployment, environment and documentation debt also we will go through. So, I guess in one of the earlier sessions architectural design consideration was covered. So, here there you might have come across design smells, like you are in the architectural phase and you have not fully implemented all the design principles. There was a study made in which it was found out that 2/3 of the software project issues, project quality issues, project delay issues are because of the incomplete implementation of design and architecture. So, the common violations are procedural thinking in object oriented programming and violation of design principles like encapsulation and modularization. So, today we live in a world where there is a tool for every task. So, there are several tools like LaTeX, Designate, Infusion. These things we can use to find out depth in design. So, what are the working groups in Joomla which are closely related with architecture? So, there is Joomla for architecture, Joomla for working group, accessibility team. So, if you are interested, you can join these groups and help in reducing the depth in Joomla. The next is code depth. So, once we make the architecture design and we start the development, these are the ways we can accumulate technical code depth, like low code quality, bad engineering or good practices that have not been followed. So, we will be under time pressure and the developer will say I will fix it later, and he will make all kinds of mistakes while coding. So, it is basically poor programming practices or code decay. So, he will not use the proper naming conventions. So, he will not look into the proper variable scope, all these issues. So, there are several tools for this: FSCOP, find bugs. This can be used to find the code depth. So, what are the Joomla working groups which are related to coding? So, there is production leadership team, SQL optimization group, accessibility team. So, you can join these groups and help in reducing the code depth. The next is the testing depth. This is the most notorious depth. So, it might be that you have started development, and in the middle of the development you might have introduced new features. So, the development team is not aware of it. So, they have not written the test cases for that. Another case may be you have written too many test cases and you do not have time to execute it. So, test cases that are not executed. The worst case is missing test plans. So, there is no synchronization between the testing team and the development team, and development is happening without proper test plans. So, these ways we get technical depth, testing depth. So, there are several tools to check for this, like NCover and Bullseye. So, what are the Joomla working groups which are working on testing? Bug squad team, automated testing team, issue tracker team. So, you can join these groups to reduce the testing depth in Joomla. Environmental depth. So, we live in a world of DevOps. So, configuration management, continuous integration, version management, branching strategy. So, if you do not follow the best principles in this, we accumulate environmental depth. There are several groups related to this: production leadership team, Joomla 4 working group, distributions working group. So, we can go through the portal, volunteers portal, and join these groups, and we can help reduce the environmental depth in Joomla. Documentation depth. So, nobody likes to do documentation, and especially in Joomla there is I think big gap in documentation between the production code and the available documentation. So, it might be a case of missing, outdated or incomplete documentation. So, these are the groups in Joomla. So, documentation working group, documentation translation team. So, you can join these groups and help reduce the documentation depth. So, recently Google did a study of their code branch, the whole code repository, and they identified a few types of build and deployment depth. One is the dependency depth, and second one is the zombie targets. So, dependency depth is basically about undeclared dependencies. Here the project main has a undeclared dependency on the bottommost library. So, once the middle project stops using the bottommost library, the topmost project build fails. So, it is an undeclared dependency. Zombie targets. So, some project team starts working on a new library and then they abandon it, but the build system still continues to build it. So, these kind of overhead. So, these kind of technical depths should be eliminated. So, these are the groups under Joomla, again production leadership team, Joomla 4 working group, distribution working group. So, we can join these groups to reduce the depth. So, we have gone through the several types of depth. So, usually technical depth is taken by the developers. So, how can I convince the management to deal with technical depth? So, most of the developers are aware that there is a technical depth, but they do not know how to convince the management to repay the debt. So, if the management is not already aware of it, most probably it is a developer issue, and the developer should take the ownership, and while giving the efforts for development for any feature, they should make the efforts for technical debt repayment as part of the development effort itself. So, now let us look into why take technical debt. So, what are the benefits of taking technical debt? Faster go to market. So, we discussed earlier the benefit of technical debt is you buy some time. So, you have you can make an early release without completely developing a feature and then release it to the end user, get the customer feedback. Lower cost of development. Since you are not completely developing the feature, you are not spending the full budget for the development. So, we have reduced the cost of development. Early release. So, we live in an agile world. So, you have a release coming up. So, through technical debt we can withhold work, make the release and then fix it later. Tactical projects, short lifetime. So, in large enterprises they take up long running projects which may run into 1 year, 2 year like that. So, in parallel they will start a short project as a tactical project which will be decommissioned after a quarter or a year. So, in these cases we need not spend all the money in developing the full quality product. Here we can take shortcuts and then we can decommission the tactical projects once the main project is launched. Prototypes. So, you are working on a prototype. So, you want to quickly check whether a feature is viable. So, here we can take technical debt and then reduce the development time. Capital crunch. So, this is the startup scenario we discussed. So, you have a startup and you are short on money. Suppose you want to make a Joomla extension release for Joomla World Conference and you have only 1 quarter to develop, but it takes 3 quarters time to actually develop the full feature product. So, in this case what you do is you take technical debt, develop within a quarter, release it to the customers. Once you have enough customers and once you have enough bank balance, you develop all the features in the extension. So, management can take debt intentionally. Earlier we saw the types of debt that developer might take. So, here we are looking into the types of debts that management may take intentionally. One is strategic debt and another is tactical debt. So, long term benefits. So, management sometimes might say that they will intentionally take strategic debt. So, the one case we saw is cash crunch. So, there is a shortage of money and the company might decide that they will not completely develop all the features, they will develop only the required features, make the release and then completely develop the remaining features. Competitive gain. Suppose the competitor is making an early release and we also have to make a release. So, in such cases the management might say that we will take the technical debt. Tactical debt. So, the management might also intentionally take tactical debt. These are basically short term debts. So, some cases may be an early release and the other one we discussed is end user feedback, to take an end user feedback. So, what are the drawbacks of taking technical debt? So, technical debt is closely related to development time. So, once a developer says I will fix it later and then he does not fix it within a week or within a day, basically he starts working around bad code. So, it will slow him down. Once we extrapolate the same issue to the whole team, now it takes longer to incorporate new features for the whole team. Another indicator of presence of technical debt is there are too many defects in the application. So, suppose you have developed a template or an extension and you are getting too many customer support requests, it is an indication that the extension is not completely developed and there is technical debt which has to be repaid. The extreme case is unstable. So, if we keep on continue to use such an completely developed product, at one stage it might become totally unstable and we might have to scrap the product. So, let us go through another frequently asked question. What payoffs have you seen from taking care of technical debt? So, the these are the benefits: yields less technical support and better foundation for enhancements. The third one is code quality have a very big effect on long term productivity. So, now we have come to the last section, when to repay debt. So, we saw that there are two types of debt that management might take: tactical debt and strategic debt. So, once you have debt, so for example, the Joomla case, we have 1000 issues in the issue tracker which have to be repaid. So, how do you plan to repay it? What is the framework for that? So, if the management has intentionally taken tactical debt, so for the next 3 sprints, they might decide that they will allocate XYZ percentage of stories in the sprints for paying back tactical debt, for fixing the known defects in the application. So, once they know the capacity in the sprint to repay the technical debt, they can prioritize all the must fix issues. So, you might have hundreds of issues to fix, so and you have a limited capacity. So, here we have to prioritize which all defects we will fix. Once we do this, usually it will be a 2 to 3 sprint plan. So, we should identify metrics, how we are going to measure the progress made. So, after every sprint, you can say that I have fixed so and so many issues, so many issues are remaining, and this is how much time it will take. So, once the management approves the plan, it comes to the development team. So, the development team, they can fix all the must fix issues, and along with the identified issues, they can do a root cause and fix the similar issues, and they will release the build for verification. So, sometimes there could be surprises when it goes for a verification. The testing team might say there are still more defects introduced because of the defect fix. So, it will take 2 to 3 iterations to actually stabilize the build, and the testing team will update all the test cases, and they will report the metrics, what is the progress made, whether the situation has improved, whether the situation has deteriorated. So, once this report is made available, the management can start tracking the technical debt, and once the build is stabilized, they can start proactively monitoring the technical debt. So, these are the few methods by which they can make sure that they will not again take technical debt in future releases, like they can follow test driven development, they can have more code reviews, and they can also follow pair programming if possible. So, what about strategic debt? How to manage strategic debt? So, tactical debt is short term, it can be quickly repaid. Strategic debt, the management has intentionally taken a long term debt. So, here we cannot repay the debt by allocating only percentage of time for debt repayment. So, here we have to allocate full sprints. So, allocate full sprints and totally reserve it for refactoring the code, prioritize features for refactoring, and identify metrics. So, usually when you have taken debt, the situation will be very bad, and lots of hard work is required to repay the debt, and the other challenge is how to prioritize features. In our case, we involved the customer also. So, they helped us in identifying the modules in the admin panel or in the front end, and then identify the high priority features which need to be fixed. So, planning is the most important. If we get the planning right, we can repay the debt. So, once the plan is approved, we have full sprints for refactoring the code. That it comes to the development team, they start refactoring the code and release the new build for verification. So, it again goes to the testing team. The testing team, they again they will update the test cases for refactored code and report the progress made. So, how to proactively control the debt once we have stabilized the technical debt in the project? Again, we can follow test driven development, we can automate the test cases, and we should have dashboard report to continuously check what is the level of technical debt in the project. Again, there are several tools available like TeamScale and SonarCube, so we can use this to have a dashboard for strategic debt. So, let us go through another frequently asked question: should technical debt be scheduled as a feature or a bug? So, if it is a debt taken tactically or strategically by the management itself, then the management is already aware that it is a repayment which has to be made, and they already have the budget for this. So, it should be taken as a feature, and the debt should be repaid. So, we went through lots of definitions. Let us have an example cash flow to understand the power of technical debt. So, suppose you are developing a new extension or a template, and you have a budget of $1000 and you want to implement 6 features. Suppose the average effort per feature is around $500. So, you are already short on cash. So, how do you effectively utilize this cash? You are in a cash crunch situation. So, you say that you will take technical debt of $250, and now the average effort per feature for development is $250. So, this is the situation, this is the roadmap if you do not take debt. So, since you have only $1000, you can have feature 1 and feature 2 in the first release. So, if you go for debt, now you can have 4 features developed with the same budget. So, you develop 4 features, you make an early release in the market, you take the feedback from the customers. The customer might say, I like feature 1, feature 4, and feature 2, feature 3 is not important to me. So, now we can discard the feature 2 and feature 3. So, with the same budget of $1000, with the technical debt, we can evaluate 4 features. So, 4 features with debt and repayment is $1500, 4 features without debt 2000. So, here we have reduced the cost for development of 4 features. Any questions? Okay, I will move on to the next slide. So, here we are taking a debt of $250 per feature. So, feature 2 and feature 3 we have discarded. The good thing about technical debt is once you discard the feature, once you discard the project, once you discard the code, the technical debt goes away. So, you junk the product, you need not repay the debt, that is the beauty of technical debt. So, for feature 1 and feature 4 we have taken a debt, we have found that the customer likes the features. So, we will repay the debt of $250 and we will fully develop it. So, that is the ideal scenario. So, now look at a scenario where we do not repay the debt. So, suppose for feature 1 and feature 4 we have not repaid the debt and the bad code is still there. Now, the developer has to work around bad code to deliver the next feature. So, now we start working on feature 5 and feature 6. So, the base rate is $500. Since we have not repaid the debt for feature 1 and feature 4, the base rate has increased from 500 to 750, because here we are paying the interest. Earlier, if there is no technical debt, if the cost to implement a feature would have been the base rate. Now, since in the earlier build we have taken technical debt, we have introduced bad code. Now, for the next features it takes more effort to release the feature. So, this is what happens if you take technical debt and we do not repay, the interest keeps on increasing and you start spending more money to introduce one feature. So, what are the next steps? So, once you go back to office on Monday or after the Diwali, so educate about technical debt in your team, create a debt tracker. So, technical debt is a reality. It is there in every development. Every development leads to technical debt. Create a debt tracker either in Excel sheet or whatever tool you have. Add at least 3 items, and so once you have the tracker mechanism in place, reserve X percentage of time for technical repayment. So, what about Joomla? So, visit the website volunteer.joomla.org. So, become a member there. You will find so many working groups. So, join those working groups and then help reduce the technical debt in Joomla. Any questions? Yeah.
So, if you're a company that has got coders working for you and you've never looked at technical debt before, where do you think would be the most efficient place to start looking? Which of the technical debt types you've talked about would kind of bring the best return so that you can show that it's a valid use of time and money?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, technical debt, so there are two scenarios. One scenario is where you have intentionally taken the debt strategically or tactically, in which case you are already aware that you have taken a debt and you know the amount of debt you have taken. That is the ideal situation. So, the other situation you are asking is, I have a company, I have a team of development, and I have few products, and how do I measure the technical debt in these products? So, one way of doing this is go to your Jira or whatever issue tracker you have. So, you might be having around 100 issues. So, take these 100 issues and multiply it by average cost it takes to fix each issue. So, it might come to around 100 or something like that. So, if you have 100 issues and you have 100, it costs $100 to fix each issue, multiply that, you will get the technical debt you are having. So, once you have this figure, you have to make a plan to reduce the technical debt. So, the motivation to make to reduce the technical debt is long term gain in productivity, and it costs less to add new features. So, these are the benefits. So, once you start thinking that you are getting too many customer calls, customer support calls, too many emails, too many calls. So, it is an indication that there is a technical debt in your product. So, the other is once your team velocity is coming down. So, earlier the team was very productive, now they are not productive. This is another indication, because they are working around bad code. It is another indication that there is a technical debt and there should be a refactoring. The other one is the code quality. So, if you maintain high code quality, it is easier to, it is highly maintainable.
So, do you think that code quality would be a good place to start to see if there's lots of to-dos and fix these and I broke this?
Yes.
Or looking at how many issues are outstanding?
So, if you want to quantify, go at the issues, to look at the issues. Yeah, sure. Okay, I think everybody is waiting for to celebrate Diwali. Happy Diwali to all.